All right, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Prescribed Fire for Forest Management webinar series. Uh, on behalf of the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point and the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, welcome back to our webinar series exploring prescribed fire for forest management. Before we begin today, we acknowledge that the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point occupies the land of the Ho-Chunk and Menominee people. Please take a moment to honor the ancestral Ho-Chunk and Menominee land and the sacred land of all Indigenous people. Okay, my name is Paul Cole, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. A little about myself. I graduated from UWSP back in '05 with a degree in Forest Ecosystem Restoration and Management. Being active in the Society for Ecological Restoration and the Wildland Fire Crew, I became red carded in 2002. Over the years, I participated in many prescribed burns and a few local suppression efforts across Wisconsin and the UP. Following point, I attended Michigan Tech for a forest ecology degree and began working with the U.S. Forest Service JW Toomey Nursery up in the UP as well. The strong U.S. Forest Service fire crews up there kept me excited about fire and provided many opportunities. We conducted many jack pine restoration burns and even began including fire into our native seed production programs. In 2012, I left the Forest Service and became the forest manager for the Stockbridge-Muncie community. Here I've been able to work with the BIA and MTE fire crews and focusing on burns to promote grasslands, savanna, and forest ecology. Most recently, my team and I have been preparing an understory burn in a thinned natural pine stand to promote blueberry regeneration. Due to our conservative forest management and the lack of fire over the years, blueberries are virtually gone from the Stockbridge-Muncie lands, and we are hoping we can restore this traditionally important food and the dwindling ecosystem that surrounds it. Throughout my time here at Stockbridge, I've been able to lead on our upcoming speakers' expertise, helping me learn from MTE's experience. Our invited speaker will explore several facets of prescribed fire related to forest and forest management. They have been invited to provide their perspective and offer advice on how we can advance prescribed fire as a forest management tool in the future. We don't expect our speakers or anyone to have a definitive answer about what the future will look like. Rather, we hope the series will provide insights, pose questions, and stimulate our collective thinking. So today our focus will be on fire and traditional ecological knowledge in the Lake States. The Great Lakes tribes have been using fire as a tool throughout history to encourage specific plant species, attract more game, and manipulate ecosystems. Unfortunately, through the decades focused on suppression, many of these tactics and traditions have been sedated or the ecosystems have changed so greatly that frequent low-intensity fires are no longer feasible. Only recently are we really beginning to understand the importance of fire and what it will take to bring it back, what it'll take to bring back this valuable tool. Our forecomers spent generations learning to use fire, which helped them thrive in these ecosystems. And as we learn more, it is important to incorporate this traditional ecological knowledge of these people. Our upcoming speaker has spent his career doing just that. So before I introduce our guest, we have a few quick housekeeping items to review. Session recordings, additional resources, evaluation links, and information about continuing education will all be available through the portal. We will do our best to ensure the recordings are posted within 2 weeks of today's session. To receive continuing education credits, you must be registered through UWSP and you must complete the Microsoft form provided to you during the session. This link will be posted periodically throughout the day in the chat feature. If you are watching a recorded session, you will need to record your attendance using a different link that will be provided in the portal. If you have any questions on that, please email wfc@uwsp.edu. Right. Oh, yeah, there it is. Let's see. It is critical that everyone attending the live sessions or watching the recordings is registered for the series. This helps us with securing funding to continue offering these free educational opportunities. We kindly ask that you do not share the portal Zoom link or Zoom recording to someone not registered for the series. We thank you for your cooperation. This series is hosted by the Wisconsin Forestry Center at the University of Stevens Point and the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources Department of Forestry. An evaluation link will be provided later this morning, and we hope you'll provide feedback so we can continue and to improve our series. Let's see. Although you are attending virtually, we still want to hear from you. Please type any questions or comments into the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please type any comments into the chat function of Zoom. The chat feature may not be monitored for questions, but our technical host is monitoring for content. We will do our best to address all questions and comments, but may be limited by time. Before we begin today, please say hi and let us know where you're all from. As of today, we have close to 1,000 listeners from more than 60 states and provinces throughout North America, Europe, Asia, Australia, Africa, and South America. So if you know anyone in Antarctica, let's get the last one. Let's see. And last but not least, we sincerely appreciate our sponsors for making this opportunity free for all of us. Today, we would like to highlight our series platinum sponsor, the National Wild Turkey Federation, and our gold level sponsor, the Nature Conservancy. So now let's get on to our presentation for today. Please help me welcome Ron Waukau. Ron is a member of the Menominee Nation and has had a long career with the Menominee Tribal Enterprises. He began as a timber marker back in 1988, but was later moved into wildland fire in 2006. Ron spent years as the fuel specialist and finally as the fire management officer, working with prescribed burning crews and details across the country. He then spent a few years with the inventory and GIS teams, but now Ron has taken on leadership of Menominee Tribal Enterprise and has quickly incorporated his fire expertise into the overall forest management regime. Ron began marking trees, but over the years climbed his way to the very pinnacle of one of the most prestigious forests in the world. Ron is an amazing storyteller and an inspiration to those who want to better understand the integral role fire plays in forest ecology. So please help me welcome Ron.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for that nice introduction. That was really nice. I appreciate that. A little bit more about myself. Yeah, he covered it well. I've been on the forest for a long time. I grew up here on the Menominee Reservation, doing a lot of different things growing up. Doing a lot of it was based and carried on around the resource. Always out doing something related to forest. My family was involved in logging and forestry. My brother went to school at Michigan Tech to be a forester. So always around it, and it was always here for us. And I was always fascinated by how our forest and the structure of our forest and our management compared to other places and other communities. So yeah, my involvement in fire started early. The Menominee Nation was able to get and Menominee Tribal Enterprises was able to get a fire program funded by the BIA in 1991, I believe, was the initial start of the fire program. With that came suppression activities, mainly. And as we started to develop the forestry program, where we had an ecologist position, a forest ecologist that was interested and wanted to bring fire back into certain areas of the forest. So that's where the fire initially started getting put back on the land here, which probably was over 100-year gap of fire being used on the forest for purposes of the tool of fire being put back. So it was a big gap, and it had big effects on the forest, as you'll see in my presentation. So now today we're bringing it back. We're learning. We talk about ecological knowledge that we lost, that we're learning. We're piecing it together here in a story. looking at our forest, we're able to see where fire was used, how it was used, the vegetation manipulation that took place. We're writing it into our prescriptions, our silvicultural prescriptions. We're putting fire in a lot of our pine and oak language, our more open areas in the southeast corner, as you'll see. So we're trying to restore some of the landscape back that was here pre-settlement. Like Paul talked about the blueberries. We also are trying to bring back certain landscapes and certain sections of landscapes that were present prior to settlement here. So, and reservation formation. So today's the burn day here for us. So be the first one. We're going to put fire on the ground today somewhere. The guys are rustling around. I can hear them upstairs. I can hear them, see them outside getting stuff ready. So we will be putting fire on the ground today, somewhere on probably in the open grassy areas. Really early spring for us. Might be as early as we've ever put fire down. I think it's got to be really close to being the earliest we've ever put fire down on here as on the forest. So that's a good thing. It's concerning in one aspect. Does that mean a shorter window at the end? Probably, but you got to take advantage of the burn days when you have them. That's one message you'll hear from me quite a bit. When it's a good day to burn, you're putting fire on the ground. That's what we try to do here. So burn about 1,000 for us, about between 1,000 and 1,500 acres a year. Prescribed fire varying from all different types of hazard fuel reduction type burns to wildlife openings to silvicultural aspects of putting fire on the ground for silvicultural needs. So, and all different types of stands and treatments. So that's a little bit I'll talk about, but I'll get into the presentation now. Is that it, Paul?
Looks perfect.
Are we good? Okay. All right. Again, I'd like to thank Paul, Susan, and everyone that coordinated this effort to have these series. It's excellent. It's a great opportunity to share information. I'm grateful to be here today to be able to talk about it. Again, our knowledge, we're regaining what we've lost due to fire suppression, reservation. We've been through a lot as a tribe that kind of took away our ability to burn and took away our traditional knowledge, and we weren't able to pass that on as cleanly as some of our other oral traditions that we're able to keep connecting the dots of how, where, and when we used to burn, which is kind of traumatic in a way that we weren't able to keep that string going and keep fire on the ground throughout this whole entire time. But we're here today. Again, like I said, we're getting it back. So I'm going to start. So those of you that are not familiar with the Menominee tribe, this is where we're located in relation to the rest of the state. So we're north central part of Wisconsin, west of Green Bay, east of Wausau, if you guys are familiar with the state. So we sit in this area, and there's a lot of history to it, as I'll get into it, why we ended up here, as you'll see in the next upcoming maps. And this is a satellite image. We get a lot of discussion about our satellite picture, that we can see it from the satellite image. We have this different lakes down here in the corner, but as you'll see, if you can kind of still see the scar that's going through the forest here. That was a natural disturbance wind event tornado from 2007 that came through, and we are putting some fire back into that actual area, kind of keeping some of that early successional, because that's a big block of our forest. That's northern hardwood, old sugar maple, hemlock, yellow birch type, heavy soil, rich soil, northern hardwood area. So that's where the storm went through, and we're able to. I thought it was important to keep some of them pieces together up there and keep it open, especially around some of the lakes. So that's a satellite image. So if in reference to the previous map, you can kind of look at the territory. That's the territory of the Menominee tribe back in 1848, the treaties. So with each year that's listed on the map is a treaty that was with the United States government that took away large sections of the territory of the Menominee, dating back, yeah, as you can see the date. So a lot of the settlement was in around Green Bay, and Fort Howard, and Jean Nicolay showed up. The Menominee tribe had a lot of this area was being managed. A lot of this area was being managed with fire at that time. So you can see how big of a territory that they occupied. The area was occupied by different, if we wanted to talk about clans, or we want to talk about different expertise of tribal members at that time that were able to live in this area and keep managing. So we have the Lake Winnebago, and Lake Poygan and Lake Butamore and these areas, but the Wolf River runs through it, and that Kashina Falls was, as in the next month or so, the fish would have returned from Lake Winnebago, the sturgeon, and that was a huge part of the tribal culture, tribal diet. So they had the fisheries there. We had fisheries and fish expertise up and around Green Bay, Lake Michigan. Our origin story started up in Menominee, up in Marinette on the Menominee River. At the mouth of the Menominee River is where the origin story of the Menominee tribe started. So the fish were able to come all the way up into Green Bay before all of the dams and before all of the areas where they could still freely travel. And that was a big part of the tribe, the sturgeon. So also in this large area I'm sure was big areas that were being burned, areas of expertise where people were putting fire on the ground and learning from where they would put fire on the ground, where to put it down, when to put it down, how to use it is quite an amazing feat for me. We talk about it today. We talk about all the positions and all of the expertise and ecological knowledge, and that was well understood, and that was being by all the tribes across the United States, wherever they were burning. That was a knowledge that was created and learned over time. That's pretty amazing. So we had this large area that was basically taken down to this in 1854, to the square box that you see. And Paul mentioned he's a forest manager for Stockbridge Munsee. That was added 2 years after the Menominee Reservation 1854 treaty was the 1856 treaty. So that's the history of the look and the shape of our reservation. A lot of that was going on at this time. Was prior to the treaty, was the movement of the Menominee was being discussed amongst the government, the federal government, and with the tribe talking to, and there was one chief that was very significant in during this time period, and very fortunate to have that type of leadership in place at that time, and that was Chief Oshkosh. And he, the plan for the plan the government had for the Menominee tribe was to move them to Crow Wing, Minnesota, which is north central part of Minnesota, and have I forget what the size acreage was, reservation up there, and this land would have been completely, the Menominee would have been completely removed from this area. So, he did not agree with that. He did not necessarily like the fact that all of our traditional knowledge that was gained over having been in this area for so long, that was not going to work for the tribe, that starting over and going up where there's already tribes established and settled, and throwing another tribe in the middle of all that was from from a long ways away and down here in Wisconsin wasn't a good thing for the tribe. So he went up and looked at it. He went up and took a look at where we would be, and really, so this was kind of a placeholder from the way I read the history in here from our cultural historic preservation officers, that Menominees were put here as kind of a placeholder. It's kind of rugged. It's kind of a, I guess, wilderness designated. It's not good farming land. That where we're located, there's a lot of glacial. There's a lot of hills and rocks and rivers and lakes. Not the good ag land. So kind of put the tribe here for now. Let them hold there. Let's figure out what we're going to do with them. Take them to Minnesota, but Chief Oshkosh held his ground. He didn't agree with the government. He really negotiated and really wanted to stay here. So we're very fortunate to have what we have. There's a lot of history there. So I think that's important to cover as we move forward. And when we talk about our history, so we look at our forest history as this original vegetation map, 1832 to 1866, General Land Office Survey. I'm sure a lot of folks that are on the call are familiar with this, but it really gives you a snapshot and look of at the state, of how it looked pre-settlement. So as we're moving forward, you can see a lot. The white is prairie, the red is jack pine, um, the blue is big hemlock hardwood stands, and everything in between here. So it gives us a really good look, and it really gives us a look at how much fire was being used at that time, also. So it gives us a look at the vegetation in the 1830s. And so when we look at it, here's some of the notes. These are actually from the forest. We know that by the township and range listed. These are all available online if anyone's interested. But you can look at the notes. So we can look at this township and range in the section, and look at where these handwritten notes were taking place from 1843, as surveyors were going through the land, and they're going through what we currently know is a reservation, and then they would note entering burnt lands in their notes. So every corner, every section, they would do a veg, like a description, like a white pine 24-inch. So that's how the map was created. The previous map was created. They're able to take all of those points from these notes, and they were able to put together that vegetation map, a GIS map. So you can see entered burnt lands. We know right where this is on our forest, and generally where this and leave burnt lands. So we know there was fire present, and there was fire. It was entered as burnt lands in the 1840s. There's the link where the notes, we got the notes for this particular survey. So we took the survey notes data from the big Wisconsin original vegetation map, and then we applied it. Our GIS inventory person applied it to our land base. So this is a scaled down version, a zoomed in version of what that very same map would look like on our forest currently as we sit. So you can look at, the amount of aspen. We can look at the amount. So this is the Wolf River, pretty much that runs through here. We had, the southeast corner. So it's real sand, a much more sand in the southeast, leading back up to a very heavy, rich soil to the northwest. So we have a lot of variety and a lot of diversity throughout the forest due to where we're located. So from basically outwashed glacial sands to northwest corner was heavy sugar maple dominated hardwood forests. So and we look at some of the vegetation that's listed on this map. We can see that there's a lot of aspen, there's a lot of white birch, there's a lot of actual, even it was typed as brush back in these days. And then we'll focus on this block here, was considered a brush, just on the west side of the reservation, right along the southern boundary. There was a lot. So there's a lot of, so this map tells us there's a lot of burning. There's a lot of burning going on this side. There was some disturbance based things going on over here, because this is a higher habitat type for the foresters in the room, the higher habitat type. So really this habitat type's consistent with this up here, which is northern hardwood. So we have something occurred here back in there, probably early 1800s, that created this brush as it was typed in this survey. So whoever was going through there called it brush. And so there's a bulk of our fire, where fire was happening and putting fire on the ground over here on this side of the reservation. So we found a 1914 planning map. It was one of the oldest maps we had found in the in our office, digging around looking at these old maps. So we move forward from the 1840, 30s and 40s to these areas that were scattered open pine. Again, fire, much more fire being used over here. This brush that we had typed back in the original survey is now a young pine. There's young pine growing there. Now that pine is 180 to 190 years old, that we'll talk about later. So that all of that disturbance, all that burning, all of that, taking care of this from a brush stage. So when they're calling it brush, there was actually pine growing in there, and it's some of the more beautiful pine stands that we have on the forest. So we know that links back. We know that links back to our history here. The scattered open pine on this side of the forest was burned also, but due to the fire suppression and reservation formation, our ability to burn was really, once the reservation was formed, was taken away from the members at that point. So it was kind of illegal to be doing that type of burning that they become so accustomed to. So that allowed this to fill in with, we'll talk about emulsification and all of that later. But this is scattered open pine. Now it's scattered pine with mid-tolerant hardwoods growing in here. The pine component's still there, but it's all filled in due to lack of burning or lack of fires that we've had. So these is areas where we're doing a lot of work as well. Down in this corner, we're doing a lot of work to try and bring, as Paul mentioned before, to bring back the gathering and blueberry opportunities that the tribe had pretty much mastered at one time. We're trying to bring it back. So this blowdown I'll talk about the blowdown and the significance of the blowdown. Uh, as a reservation was formed, um, before this blowdown, logging was occurring on the river of the Wolf River, where there was a sawmill at Kashina Falls down here. So everything was still being river run, pine down here. There was some logging going on. When the blowdown occurred, this big wind event that came in from the west side, the tribe wanted to capture the value of that timber, and that's where Neopit, the town of Neopit, came from. Neopit comes from a name of a chief that was around with Oshkosh. Um, so Neopit was formed. Um, the sawmill was born 1909. So that was established to make sure we capture this. So we do have a sawmill here that's still there. And then from that, there was railroad spurs. So away, kind of transitioning away from the river run logging to getting into rail and having logging camps spread out throughout the reservation, and then rail bringing logs back into Neopit in the beginning of the Neopit sawmill. So, and looking at the map, looking at, Chief Oshkosh's vision about traditional ecological knowledge and where the tribe needed and wanted to be to be able to continue using that knowledge, you need to look at this map. We had the southeast corner was rice, a lot of wild rice, lakes, um, a lot of blueberry and gathering going on. So you had your rice and blueberry, had the Wolf River, there's transportation. Um, we had, the sturgeon. We're returning to Kashina Falls here, and that aspect was in place for the tribe to be able to have the return of the fish every spring. The dams that were built in the, I think they were in the 20s, 1920s, late 20s. There was a paper mill dam and electrical dam built just off the reservation here in what is now Shawano. So the fish cannot return. That stopped the return of the fish to Kashina Falls. So that was a big impact on the tribe as well. But that was in place. And then our maple syrup gathering, and was a huge part. It was a big part of the culture. So all the pieces were in place. Again, we owe it to Chief Oshkosh to be able to have that vision to see and keep us where we were able to do all the things that we were doing on a much bigger scale across the bigger territory pre-reservation. Talk about fire. John T. Curtis book. Again, I'm sure people are familiar with the vegetation of Wisconsin. I grab quotes out of there a lot because it was right on, in my opinion. As we look, that was our forest, 1900s. You can see the burnt stumps, but the quote, it wasn't getting a lot of understanding. There was not a lot of understanding of why or what the landscape looked like, and there's a lot of credit given to the tribes for their ability to burn and understand fire. They were not probably, as Curtis says, the sole cause of fires, but the lightning fires, we all know here we have them, but they're pretty rare. We get a lot of rain and stuff, so it's not like the Western scenario where you're getting a lot of lightning strikes. A lot of the fire that in fire history that we're seeing was due to the cultural burning. I leave this next slide, because even with some of our forestry practices today, that we do apply on the forest, some of it does require even age management. And like I said, we lost our understanding of all of that over a couple of 3 generations of removing and reservation and not having, being able to put fire back underground. But I have to show these stumps are still present, but now it's all aspen, white birch, growing. So when we do a restoration, or we do a even-aged management type approach on some of these lands that we're looking at now. There's, you got the 80 to 90-year-old aspen stands that we're going to open back up. Even today with the tribal members, we still have to go out, do outreach and talk about, this is what our forest looked like prior to reservation formation. There was our members. So you got to bring back that cultural importance of fire and how much fire was used, because, past generations only know, that it's a bad, we suppress it and we put them out. That it's kind of a scary thing for them, and you see it on the news. And so it's really re-educating and learning ourselves as we put fire on the ground, sharing that knowledge that we're learning, and explaining the cultural importance back to our membership. Here's a powerful picture that we found in an ethnology report. I think it was Walter J. Hoffman report. But when I first found the book and was looking through the book, I was looking at all the pictures, and I looked at this camp of berry pickers, and they were camped. What captured my eye right away was the landscape behind them. Full evidence of manipulating the vegetation. They're camped right in the middle of a giant berry picking area that I'm sure they maintained. I'm sure they were putting the fire on the ground and coming back to these areas and rotations to be able to gather. So yeah, there's a fire here, and I'm sure a lot of the discussions and planning and stuff went on around the fire, but there's no mistaking that look behind them. There's no. We know now from our experience of trying and managing pine and using, when we take a pine stand like you're seeing in that picture, and we try to reset it and kind of set it up for a shelter wood, a seed, to get the seed tree cut, shelter wood look in there. We have a lot of competition. A lot of the trees that we're removing, we want to come back and re-sprout. So they weren't having that problem because they continually kept and putting fire down in there, so they had that really nice look to it already. So this is a very powerful, important picture when we look back and when we talk about and do outreach to our members about the cultural importance of fire and how it was used. Just some historic photos. The birch bark we all know birch is it's a species that's, pioneer species that comes back. So, they knew that they were using it. They're having to keep any of the forested stands and stands that they were gathering birch bark from in a certain um, state as well. They had to keep it set back, and they had to keep, enough birch in supply to be able to use it for, obviously canoes, baskets, and any of the other use. So that was another area. I'm sure that it's very important to them to keep enough of that in supply, or keep stands, allow them to grow out so where they could gather the white birch. So it's another fire dependent species that we talk about that kind of gets overlooked a little bit with all the berry talk and everything else. But white birch was a very important part of the culture of the Menominee. This is a 19, I think it's I can't remember the date of the photo, 1920-ish photo of the southeast corner. Now this is the area I pointed out that was more sand, more of the outwash sands area of the southeast corner. I'm sure this was bulk of the blueberry gathering was going on, but this was called a southeast corner fire. You can see as it hazes out in the back, you can kind of see the smoke, but you can see the look. That's a really nice look with the scattered open legacy. These pine are legacy trees in our stands. Now they're all scarred up. They have a lot of fire scars. They're still present. So we're taking, again, what we learn and what we're seeing and piecing together the history of what that landscape looked like, and we're opening it back up down there on certain stands, and we're leaving the large red pine structure, taking out the pin oak. What you're seeing down here is pin oak kind of filling in. But these were the type of fires, when these fires were occurring um, during the suppression eras, fires that they weren't even worried about these type fires down here because they were so low intensity. They would just let them back and burn. They were more focused on where the bigger, heavier fires, where the logging activity was occurring back in the early 1900s. So um, this also gives us a snapshot of what that area used to look like compared to today. I failed to mention this picture was taken out of a tower, out of a fire lookout tower. So we had the guys go back up. We went up and took a look to the southeast, and we took a current image of that same area, and you can see the pine structure still there. We have done some management. This is kind of more like a pine release type cut, but there's a lot of these tops you're seeing in the front are all pin oak filled in, and there's oak wood issues and pin oak stands down there. So we're really looking at the landscape down there now and how much pin oak do we want to leave. The rest of it we're going to probably try and open back up and be putting fire back, and we'll let some aspen come back. We'll have a structure of forest and open areas that we're going to try and balance, and we're going to try and, as Paul stated, bring back those gathering opportunities for the membership down there. And as we learn more about um, the fire and the fire use and the knowledge of it, this is also an area that's heavily this is our WUI urban interface area down here. As you can't see anything in this photo, but there's a lot of development and homes and structures down in this corner. So when we're doing that, we got to balance obviously our smoke, our we got to go out and do the outreach to tell them we're going to be putting more fire down there. So this is a concern for our urban interface, wildland fire protection as well. So as we open it back up and put more fire down, we'll be addressing those public concerns down there as well. So what you're seeing in that photo is exactly what the emulsification type litter that we have in the trees that are growing in. Probably everyone on the call is familiar, I hope, with this type of fire suppression and the effects that it can have on your forests and vegetation, where we see it every day. So pre-1900s, as some of the pictures I was showing earlier, much more open, scattered, gathering opportunities, areas. So fire suppression, reservation formation, tribes were able to put, it started to fill in. Shade tolerant trees started to become, the pin oaks were coming in, the mid tolerant red maple in mid 1900s as we kind of suppressed all the fire out in that area as they occurred. Dramatic increase in these type shade tolerant trees, early 2000s. So that's what we sit now looking at out among the forest in that southeast corner. So if we do nothing, it'll just transition over time. If absolutely nothing is done out there, it'll transition its way back out. We'll lose the structure that we had. So again, we're recognizing that we're putting things back, put some pieces of what was out originally in that area back into our forest management plan. And this is a look that this is a shelterwood pine, white pine shelterwood. Trees are probably 180 years old that we've been burning in. This is a look that we kind of want to get these, and as I always talk about piecing things back together. I think, and as we look at it, think about the berry camp photo, and there's some gathering opportunities in here as well. The overall forest management goal here is to regenerate this stand back to pine. So in order to keep it and hold it in this nice state, this vegetative state you're seeing here, we've been putting fire in there. We've been putting fire in there, and that's I really think how these stands originated. If you go back to the berry picking photo, as burning stopped and as things slowed down in that area, timber became more of a timber producing tribe than selling blueberries and maple sugar and stuff like that. These stands were left. I say from a forestry standpoint, they were site prepped perfectly for these pine trees to seed back in. It's what we're learning. It's what we're trying to do. We're trying to learn from what the parents and the grandparents of these trees. What did they? Why is this pine growing on such a high site? How hard is it for us to get pine back in here? It's pretty tough because of the competition. But if we're able to keep burning it and putting fire back in there on rotation and each year we're monitoring the pine. We're monitoring the cone development. One thing that we're learning, I've learned over the past 30 years is how sporadic and I don't say I guess they're unpredictable. You can kind of count on a pine cone crop a good one between every 7 years. Um, so that's a balance there. Can we burn? We got to balance the amount of acres that we set up and how many acres do we want to put in this state to get regenerated back? Because it's a 30-year fight with the when you decide to pull the trigger on a shelterwood on the forest, it's going to be a 30-year with the hardwood competition coming back. Everything is going to want to grow back in here. So using fire in here, it checks a couple of boxes for us. It can be in that cultural state, gathering opportunities. There's blackberries in here until we get a seed, a good seed falling in. It's going to seed back in the pine, and then at that point we'll have to do timber stand improvement, keep the hardwood off the pine and keep it going, and then we'll, after a certain amount of time, we'll let it go back in um, into the production of pine, and so it'll stay a pine type on our forest. But we have so many of these areas across, and we have so many areas to schedule and look at yet that there'll always be this section and blocks of this forest available to the tribal membership. And we need to not look too far across the forest to see if we don't do anything. We know, that emulsification will occur here. That's example of it here. This is a section of the forest. One section. This is not the same exact area, but it's within that section somewhere. The amount of pine that was growing when this photograph was taken. It's some of the oldest pine we have on the forest, and nothing was done. There was no, so it was managed under basically a risk vigor thin from below type prescription that was taking place here. That and then we know that if we do nothing, and there's no disturbance or there's no opening it up, we know that we're not going to get to pine regeneration. You can see some of the stump removals. What you're going to see is a hardwood coming back. We got yellow birch, we got sugar maple, we got beech filling in where it used, disturbance based, and I'm sure burning occurred to create this stand that we're kind of this part of the forest, we're kind of like just letting it phase out. Risk vigor removal over the next 3 entries, and there's probably not going to be a pine component in there anymore. So we'll just have these pictures and some scheduling and documentation on these type stands. There's not a lot of acres like this, but this is one that shows us, the end result if nothing's done to manage the pine. I did mention some of our records. Again, it's looking back at our records that we can find in our historic documents to give us a clearer picture. So you can see the 1885 revenue was all reported to the government, federal government, on what the tribe was bringing in for revenue. So logs back in 1885, maple sugar, which was an amazing amount, 60 to 80 tons. I mean, I had to read that several times. If anyone that's done maple tapping and knows how much how much work that would have been. So, in the peak productions, there was furs trapping was still occurring, and then the blueberry number was pretty amazing as well. To have that type of landscape, to be gathering that many bushels of blueberries, and that was what was sold. That's not even considering what was personally cached and used by the tribe during that time. So, and then the bottom footnote that I put in is these kind of fell into traditional forest products, kind of insignificant as income generators once the timber revenue in the tribe timber became what we did exclusively, I guess, become known as Menominee Forest, and Menominee more of a timber based tribe, but they still retain strong cultural significance here. There's everyone families that are tapping maple, have little sugar camps. Got people are still trapping, obviously, and the blueberry part is what we're working on right now, as is Paul. Well, getting that back on the landscape. Just an old maple sap container, and it's yellow birch. You can see the trees were tapped. The trees were tapped in a camp, kind of an open area, but the maple sap to do the production they were doing under this type of collection. Again, is just wanted to show how much work that really was to be able to produce those type numbers. So I talk about taking the fire away. This is us, picture of us, one of our prescribed fires, one the program was doing. You can kind of see some of the forest management we're doing. We're trying to convert some of this back to there's some pine conversions here, plantation. There's some natural stand. This is basically a big opening. It's not big for us, 20-acre opening along the Wolf River that we identified as a ecologically important piece to have over there. So we've been putting fire in there and keeping the growth out and keeping these type openings spread across the forest. But again, John T. Curtis, elimination of fire, just really powerful quotes that I took from the book. I found this interesting, the Journal of Forestry. So also laying in the basement of our forestry building were stacks of journals of forestry, which I know the DK Mesereau was talking about white pine, perpetuating white pine back in 1930s up in Canada. So I think this is an important quote as well as we move forward and learn our resource. We got 10,000 acres of mature white pine on the forest that we're not going to be able to regenerate it all back to white pine. We're not going to be able to create as the clock ticks on these stands. We are going to, one thing in the Shelterwood system that we did over time in the last 30 to 40 years was, we'd cut a stand, we would keep it open, we would try and fight the vegetation back. We did use some chemical, and then we were waiting for the seed fall to come in, and then we would have a lot of areas to prep when we did get a cone crop. So we had to balance our acres with the seed crop and the capabilities of our forest development program. But here's a quote that in the 30s they were looking at how important of a tool that silvicultural measures, where silviculture was mentioned in the 30s with aspects of forest fires and putting fire down. So that's a tool that we're using, and we're going to use like understory, pre-harvest type burns, setting these up. One of the more recent prescriptions we wrote for a pine stand is we're going to open it back up, leave the pine, thin the pine stand. It's 100 years old. The pine stand's about 100. We know if we open it up and we keep fire in there, so it was written in there to keep fire in there for the next 30 years. Setting it up, it's not that high quality of a stand from a timber quality standpoint. It's more of a kind of an open grown, lower quality pine, but it's well stocked. I think we can. So we're going to write that, apply that, get the treatment done from um, our logging, have them cut up, have our fuels crew go in and take care of the fuel load in there, so we can start putting fire back in there on a rotation instead of battling the hardwood in there. We're just going to keep putting fire back down and hopefully get it to a nice look. And I think, in 30 years, they won't have any problems regenerating that stand back to white pine. It'll probably be starting before that with good seed producing years if we have it in that state. So we're putting fire back. The very tool that created the pine stands that we're managing, we're using that tool to put it back in there again. So a lot to learn, a lot of acres to cover, but that's what we're planning on doing. Just a picture again of our program and our us putting fire back on the landscape. Um, this was taken from a Wisconsin DNR patrol plane when we were birding. Those are 180-year-old pine, 30-inch diameter probably. Um, I like to use this slide because I think it just shows what kind of fires we're burning across the landscape pre-settlement. This was the look that we had. This was a look that was spread out across a lot of the landscape. Fires were burning frequently. It was burned and brought back, and so this is kind of, I like to imagine how the landscape and our ancestors were burning um, back when they were putting a lot of fire back on the ground. With that, I will take some questions. I hope I covered what the intent and um, of the presentation, what Paul envisioned and the group envisioned when they asked me to speak. I hope I hit on some of the stuff that you guys wanted to hear about.
All right, I think you did. I think you did great. That was really good. So I guess yeah. Now, if anybody has questions, please put them in the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to them. So looks like yeah, we've got about a half hour left. So um, so you got those. I guess the first question that came through, Ron, if you know, what size class of white birch is preferable for canoe making? You know?
The gathering that's occurring, that we're pointing the tribal members in a direction of, is that small saw log, I guess, size
Okay.
class from probably 10 to 14 inch, 10 to 16 inch birch. So that smaller, and they don't get much bigger than that. But I think we wait until they're out of that pole size class before we start. And there's certain parts of some of our management where we had a lot of white birch, so we're kind of culturally going to designate areas that are close to roads, have a lot of white birch, and we're going to designate those as gathering areas for tribal members to be able to. We probably won't just culturally designate those areas. So those are the size classes that we see right now. We're directing them into areas where we're going to do even age management. They'll call and say, where can I collect some white birch? So we'll have jobs set up that we know we're going to harvest. We send them in there and they'll go and gather. So, but we're targeting specific stands for birch.
Well, cool. Um, I guess because we're looking at that picture, I got a couple of questions about that so far. After you have a good seed year, how long do you wait to let the seedlings kind of establish before you burn again, or do you go in pretty quick after?
Once once the seedlings are established and we have the numbers that we're looking for per acre, at that point, um, we're kind of pull out the fire, and it becomes become more of a mechanical hand treatments in TSI to keep the hardwood competition off the white pine. So, um, and we getting seed fall and getting it established isn't, I mean, it's challenging, but it's not the biggest challenge as we face. Once we get the pine established, it's keeping all of the competition off it in a state where it can be um, free to grow. Uh, we do use, it does compete to get height growth, with the other hardwood trees. So there's a balance there as well. Once it gets up to that certain height, and then we'll do an initial timber stand, a TSI treatment, non-commercial, to keep the pine off, or keep the hardwood off the pine. And then once it will probably require another one down the road, 10 years, to release it again once it catches right back up. So you take the
Mhm.
hardwood off of it, it catches back up after a certain amount of time, which helps with the height growth, and then we'll take it off again. Then it's pretty much free to go. Then it'll fall back into comes out of our forest development hands and departments and back into our inventory schedule.
So I guess twofold question here. So if you had a sugar maple dominated uh, forest, do you think that adding fire back in over a decade or two, could you change that forest type and make it more uh, conducive to pine? Do you think that quickly, or do you think, I mean, just adding fire back isn't going to do it? You're going to need to put more management down.
Yeah, I think more would be required. Sugar maple dominant northern hardwood stands are difficult, short windowed, difficult to get the kind of heat you'd probably want. Maple doesn't like fire at all. So, what is our goals? What would our goals be to get pine back in there? I think we use the forest habitat classification system to direct us. But when we do get a stand, and we do have them on the forest where pine is currently growing in what would be considered a northern hardwood habitat type, we know that something occurred. Obviously there was disturbance there. Once the disturbance occurred, you know, years ago, and then did they keep it open with fire? And again, was it so why is there pine growing in the middle of a northern hardwood forest? Type questions, and we have those type stands. So they are out there. You know, we try and keep those in place, but from a eh, burning over, we're burning in the mid tolerance, where there's more oak, where there's more beech, where we have mid tolerant stands with more oak, um, and we have a lot of northern hardwood regeneration. We've been putting fire back in those to reduce that northern hardwood, heavy sugar maple, heavy beech dominated regeneration that's occurring, with a little more of an oak component. We've been burning in those to reduce that regeneration, to set it up for a regeneration cut of oak to keep that type in oak. But from a straight sugar maple dominated forest, we haven't been burning in those to get pine back. We kind of just let those uneven aged thinnings that occur. That's a normal treatment in those sugar maple stands, and that's the kind of way we treat those.
Cool. Kind of along the lines, when you do one of these, I guess regeneration harvests, how much effort does it take to prep the site before you can go in and put fire down? Because I mean, we're talking about a massive fuel load. I'm dealing with that right now, and it's hindering us from getting into some of the sites we want to burn. Just because if, especially the last 2 years, if we light that puppy up, it's all gone. So,
Yeah, early lessons learned here. Um, yeah, you don't want to set you got a lot of eyes on you, especially if you're bringing fire back. That was what we were doing 25 to 30 years ago, and we did do some damage to the residuals because we didn't mitigate enough slash um, in the from the harvest. So post harvest, if it's an initial cut, you know, we would want to reduce the fuel load significantly in there to, especially around the residual seed trees that we're leaving. Right now, um, we're fortunate to have our fuels. We got a larger fuels crew. Curtis Wakey's our fuel specialist. Um, he was supposed to be on here with me today, but so with his crew and the funding's there now, where we can go in and treat that post harvest under a urban interface fuels reduction type, which checks our box for putting prescribed fire back in there too. So it's a dual win for us. We can reduce the fire danger at the same time we can get it prepped for burning. But yeah, there's a significant amount of slash reduction you got to do in there in order not to damage and burn up your residual trees that you're trying to leave in a stand for seed. So a lot. I don't know. I don't have numbers of tons per acre or anything for you, but it's a lot of work. In them early years when we did it, it was just by hand going around the residuals, mitigating the brush, throwing it away, making sure it was far enough away where there was more open areas. We kind of get hot. There were some hot burns early on, but you can see from the photo here with the questions, now we got it looking really nice. It's just a low intensity backing. We can just back or flank a nice fire through these now. But that took 3 burns to get it to look like that.
So that kind of leads me into another question about, I guess, some of the social aspects of prescribed fire and fire in general drove, why we suppressed it for, 100 years. Do you think that the view of fire on the landscape differs within the Menominee tribal populace versus outside? And what do you think were some of the reasons that, like outreach wise or whatnot, that you got the community kind of behind it? Because you have a huge fire program and you burn a lot of acres. The community has to be behind you for that. So, how do you think that worked, especially as it differs from uh, the surrounding communities?
Yeah, we the removal of fire reservation um, status when the tribe was put on reservations and removal at that time, that generation. I mean that's yeah, I always compare. I don't know. I'm sure there's prescribed burners on here today. Um, Imagine that taken away. Like I see, and I've been there. I've been like you're outside your burning window for today, or you're outside your prescription, and you're all set up to do a burn, and you can't burn that day or that week. I know they get pretty upset. That's just one day or a week. Imagine taking it away and not being able to use that tool. That was a very significant thing that occurred, and and re-educating the tribal members on that, how that whole thing took place, and is takes a lot of outreach. Another thing that occurred, Paul, for us, which was significant, I think, was termination. The Termination Act
Mhm.
that terminated the Menominee tribe from federal recognition um, really had effect too. There was absolutely no talk. There was no fire being put down for anything other. Every fire that occurred was put out, and it was put out as quickly as possible during that era. And as a generation of people that grew up in that era that remember, that fire wasn't being talked about or used as a culturally significant tool. Definitely not being used in any of the forestry practices that were going on. So fire at that time wasn't viewed in that manner. So it's taking us to go back in. We get calls from tribal members and saying, "What are you doing? You first your guys cut. You did a harvest in there, and then then you come back in and you put fire in there. So going out in the community and doing a lot of outreach and education is required. Not a lot of them buy in, but I think when we start talking about the cultural connection and the cultural significance, and we can piece that story together, that from a tribal perspective, that helps a lot. And we're having to do that. It's not that everyone knows that importance. We're still having to re-educate based on what we're learning and what we're seeing in our forest, and how we're applying it and what we're learning as we put it back on the landscape as well. So it's it's a effort, um, that we do. We go out, we try and go out and do it as much as we can and allowable. We're having like an open house type thing on the forest. We're planning for the membership just to come and go out and see and even spread the message even more. But it is a very conscious for us to be able to go out and do that.
Cool, cool. Let's see what we got coming up next here. I guess maybe we touched a little bit on it so far, but can you give it a little idea of like what your fire and forestry programs look like size, how many people you got working on this stuff?
So my current staff, we're low staff. So my forestry staff, I have 7 foresters, 7 techs, and a timber marking crew of 3. So I got 17 people in forest management, which is low. And 25 years ago, there was probably double that. There was probably 40. There's probably 10. There was probably double the numbers and all of everything I just said, of people that were on the forest. Um, Early years was a lot of forestry staff that were red carded and getting qualified and getting the pieces in place of getting qualified burn bosses, getting all of the things you need, to check all the boxes to do a prescribed fire under the federal, system. Um, we're held to the same standard as a U.S. Forest Service, same burn plans as the Fish and Wildlife Service. Everything that we do is under that because we're federally funded from the BIA. So to check all those boxes, to get people up to par and up to qualifications took a lot of years. During those years when we were doing it, um, we used a lot of forestry staff. Now, currently, we have a fire suppression program of 6, and we have a fuels crew that's grown over the past 5 years to, um, about 17. So we have 17, not all, getting qualified, getting their experiences and stuff, but they're putting a lot of fire on the ground. So, um, that has helped us a lot, and we're developing, giving us more room to grow, and putting more fire in places where normally we wouldn't, like you talked about the slash mitigation and moving these things up, quicker on our planning efforts to be able to get fire back in there quicker. So probably total overall, probably 25 between suppression and fuels, 25 people, and then another 20 or so people in forest management.
Yeah.
So kind of small numbers for the land base that we have.
Yeah, for a 250,000 acres, that's
Yeah, each
big
one of us got
big area.
10,000 acres. So
Yeah. And then, I mean, and when you're talking about doing the same stuff as the Forest Service, I mean, you've got to run full NEPA on all
yep,
this kind of stuff. So, yeah.
all the same approvals, and mention our cooperators. We have agreements with the Forest Service. We have agreements where we can go and help. We go burn with them, they come burn with us. There's
Mhm.
training needs, everything cross. So DNR as well, WDNR. So we're cooperating and have agreements in place to um, help be good partners and good neighbors as we put fire back on the ground.
This question's come up quite a bit. For both your shelterwood harvests and then the subsequent fire, what are your rotations for the shelterwoods and then the burning after?
So initial cut on a shelter would just the picture you're seeing is kind of um it's after the first initial cut is done, it'll have this look. So those are all considered seed trees, based on their crowns and valuation. So from that initial cut to, so this one right here is probably 10 years old. It was initially cut, the fuels were treated, three prescribed burns. We haven't had the really good seed crop in there yet. So it all kind of depends on the seed and the cone development over the summer. So, and we really don't want, we try and avoid the artificial. I mean, we could just go in there and plant that too, um, and get into but we really try and take advantage of the natural seed that's available in there. So probably initial cut, probably couple years, um, depending on the schedule and availability of the fuels reduction that would need to occur in there, and then following it up with a fire. And then if to keep the hardwood regeneration back, we just monitor that. If there's no cone development or seed needs, then we just put a fire in, just a maintenance burn to keep the hardwood back in preparation for the seed development. So I'd say every 3 years we'd probably burn it. And then
Until you
once,
get a good pine seed crop coming, and then you'll let that develop and use mechanical methods until that pine's big enough to withstand a fire.
yep, and then yeah, so yeah, obviously with the amount of burning we're doing in the small windows, we can't do them all like this. We can't possibly have enough people to cover all the acreage of all of our pine stands that need to be maintained. So we have a few, we're getting more and more, but we'd like to do them all like this, but due to budgets, timing, short windows, we're doing what we can with what we got.
Okay, a couple questions that are more on the ecology than the timber side. So we talked a lot about kind of restoring blueberry foraging and things like that. Do you have any idea like what kind of blueberry component you need prior to driving a restoration cut and then subsequent burns, or are you going in with seed because it's so vacant?
In the southeast corner, that's a good question. I just asked that I was just up in Cloquet um, in February doing a talk, and I talked to some of the elders up there and some of the guys that have been burning a long time, um, and they were pretty confident that if you had the seed and you had the plants established in there, that would be enough to work from to get it back. And we are seeing that in our monitoring. They're not very robust. They've been shaded out for so long, but they are present. But seeding is an option that we've been talking about as well to get it moving along. But it seems to be slow to response. We've been burning some of that southeast corner now for a good 15 years or so on a 4 or 5 year rotation. And the plants are there and they are starting to develop a little bit more, but not as quickly as I guess I imagined. Some of the prairie grasses came back down there as well, but um, yeah, from what I was told, and what we're learning is that as long as there's an establishment of plants, even though they might be runted and stunted, that's something to work with. But we are, I guess we're getting a little impatient too. We want to get it moving.
I want
So
it now.
yeah, we want it now. We want to go pick now.
Well, that brings us pretty much to exactly the next thing. Have you seen through reintroducing fire a lot of native grasses and native plants of openings come back? And does that help you carry fire in subsequent burns?
It did, so that some of that southeast corner look I was showing the Sand Lake fire um and how it kind of filled all back in with pin oak and red maple. Those are the stands that we've been opening back up. Um, and amazingly, I mean it's an amazing plant anyway. The prairie grasses are still there. We've done nothing. I was asked by some tribal members if we planted prairie in these stands that were opened back up and put fire in, and we did not. It's all still in there in the seed bank, amazingly, and it's ready to go, even after 70, 80 years of, 60, 70 years of being suppressed under a full canopy of pin oak and pine. So they're in there. They do help. The more that's established, obviously helps with the fuel load and helps us carry and get the fire effects that we're looking for. So they're in there, open it up, put a couple fires down, and they start showing back up, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty wild how long that stuff will just sit there and hang and wait.
Yep,
But
a lot more patience than I had.
uh, so there's a question about funding. So I know you use a lot of BIA, but do you use much for like EQIP or CSP funding, or are you using almost entirely federal dollars?
At this point, it's most exclusively federal dollars, because I think I can meet multiple objectives in some of these, especially in that southeast corner, to meet multiple objectives. The fundings for hazard fuel reduction, at the same time we're opening it back up and keeping it open, um, and making it potentially more fire prone, but easier, manageable fire prone. To be a low intensity type, if we keep get the grasses back, type fire. So we're meeting, and then some of it's, silvicultural objectives as well. We've have some funding for those type burns, in the past, but as we move, I don't know what the future will hold for funding, with any objectives or where stuff will fit in. That's going to be something that we'll look at. And we did use some NRCS funding, to restore a pine stand, that was, about 15 years ago or so. But we've looked into that, and we have used some outside sources of funding to get some of that restored.
Yeah, just kind of along the same question. Um, Stockbridge has a lot more fee land, which doesn't qualify for federal monies, and the tribes do qualify for NRCS equip and stuff, and it is really nice and it's helpful. As we build our lands more federally listed, then we'll probably be able to tap into some more of the bureau type stuff. But yeah, it's good. Right now, funding's pretty decent. So
Yep. Yep.
let's see what else I got here. Let's try this one, make sure I get it right. So, how is your program incorporating growing season burns into your fire mix? If at all, are there opportunities for implementing July, August type burns that have meaningful different impacts on competing hardwoods and blueberry abundance? Would Menominee families have been burning late summer prior to colonization?
I would like to think they were thinking like we were, when it's a good day, when if they could meet their objectives of the burn during that time, they would do it,
Mhm.
regardless of the season. If it looked like, and did they understand those growing season burns produced more berry? Or I'm sure they were trying them and monitoring and seeing, and we've done them. We've done them, in the past, and had some, especially with, it wasn't berry. We were looking more at the amount of cone that was in the pine, red pine, um, in July. So, and we had a window in late in July, in that southeast corner. It was pretty, it was it was good. That was actually our best burn that we had in that. It was kind of a demonstration area for us. So we burned it prior to the seed fall. And then, yeah, we don't burn that one no more. It's pretty much loaded with red pine. So it was a timing. It was, again, it was not used to doing. One of the things with the federal is but might limit you there, is the burn, the western, um, fire season.
Yeah,
A lot of people go out. A lot of our staff rotate in and out of western, preparedness levels. If a preparedness level is nationally, if it's 5, we can't burn, even though we're in Wisconsin and our fire danger may not be anything that big of a deal. We still need quite a bit of approvals. I don't think we've ever burned under PL5 nationally. I don't think anyone has. So that's another limiting thing for those growing season burns. But if there's folks around and we have enough people and there's a window, we'll be putting fire down, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, getting that window in our rainy season is sometimes hard.
Yeah, it is, and we've done them in July and August. July that was a really good burn for us. So but we haven't done a whole lot of it since.
Uh, you got a question. Can you share your observations with mortality, both from fire and wind throw, in these mature overstory white pine residuals? So, it's a real big toothpick standing out there in the open.
Yeah, and a lot of I didn't mention our wind events that we have and had more recently. More wind events um, in the last so wind events that we've actually salvaged the timber off and taken to the sawmill. We had a 2017, a 2019, and a 2023 wind event. That probably totaled up around 30 million feet of timber in those wind events. So um, any of the but I mean, it's a big part. So we're looking at these wind events now, these natural disturbance, if they are in a pine component or if they are in an area where we would consider shelterwood use, that we're just taking advantage of those, especially down, the Camp One area, the southern part of the forest where I talked about. If there's holes punched in there, we're kind of just cleaning them up, keeping them open. We're talking about putting fire back in there and taking advantage of those. But yeah, I mean, to your question, um, I guess, was it talking about snags, leaving those structures in the burn, or I guess I kind of lost your question. I don't know
Um,
if I answered it.
yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of looking at, are you seeing a lot of these big white pines tipping over after you
Yeah,
opening cut or,
we
you
do.
know,
There definitely the screen that's up. Um, Definitely higher effects of wind in these. We're having to salvage. We're having to go in and collect. They are more susceptible to wind when you do that, and we've been having more wind events. So numerous times in the past, 3 wind events have been spent in these shelterwood stands because of the amount of wind that they take. We try and get in there and salvage what timber we can out of it.
yeah, yeah. Let's see. Do you know, are we going to 10, correct? Oh, Susan's on it.
All right.
So, thanks again, Ron. That was really good. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for today, but we want to sincerely thank Ron for sharing his experience and expertise. Please take a moment to evaluate today's session so we can improve the series. If you can scan the QR code or click on the link in the chat, the evaluation link will be also posted in the portal. So thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again on April 3rd when we discuss prescribed fire and traditional ecological knowledge beyond the lake states. So thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks again, Ron. It's been fun, and have a great day.